best thing that you can do is think like a scientist. Start with the problem you're trying to solve first. It will do wonders to your decision making and your clarity of thought if you can do that.
Today on Strategy Shorts, I'm very excited to introduce Travis Terrell to you, the audience. He is someone I've known for over a decade at this point, but somebody I've only met in person just the once. Travis, it's great to have you on the show.
Dan, thanks so much for having me. This is such a pleasure, and I'm excited to dig in a little bit.
Awesome. Now, you're the founder of a company called Soundstripe, but that's not where your journey started. So why don't you give us a bit of a background pre-Soundstripe, and then we'll talk about Soundstripe after that.
Sure. Well, so I got my start as a musician. I moved to Nashville. I made my mother very angry by dropping out of college and saying I wanted to be a musician. And I moved to Nashville when I was, I think, 19 years old, and didn't know anybody, didn't have any money. And one thing led to another, and I started joining some bands. I started playing in the studio. I started to love the studio, and I did get to. I got so lucky in being able to travel the world with a lot of different groups and bands, and that sort of um, you know led into what would become Soundstripe. But that, I did the music thing for probably a decade or so.
So if you could talk a little bit about what Soundstripe is doing now and what the company exists for and who it exists for. But I'm also really interested in the transition from kind of like touring session musician and producer into tech founder, because normally I guess you wouldn't normally put those two things beside one another. It doesn't seem like a natural transition. I mean, it is, because it's all about music in one sense, but still it's an unusual leap to make. So tell us what Soundstripe is, but also tell us about that transition. Like, how did you move from one thing to the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, yeah, let me maybe back up and say we started the company 8 years ago now. We were very lucky and right place at the right time. We started one of the very first subscription-based music licensing companies. And so what does that mean? It means that we create and license background music for customers of all kinds, from the most amateur YouTube creator and content creator all the way to some of the world's biggest brands and even TV shows. And one stat that we're really proud of is that over 1 million videos get added to YouTube every quarter with Soundstripe music on them. And so there is a chance, if you've been scrolling YouTube late at night over the 8 years, there is a high chance that you've listened to Soundstripe music in some form or capacity and not even known it. And our mission of the company is to keep creatives creating, and that sort of drives us and has from the very beginning. And to this date, we've paid millions and millions of dollars out to artists, which is just it's why we do what we do. We're passionate about helping these creatives and these artists get paid fairly for what they do. So it kind of drives us, and honestly, that's what drove me to start this company. It came out of a necessity, honestly, which so many founders have that same story. But we were struggling musicians. We had a little recording studio, me and my business partner, Micah. We had a little recording studio, and we were doing, the work we could. We were freelancing and doing that. We did that for about 4 years, and then just realized it was about a year that we started to see problems in the industry, how difficult music licensing was, how complicated it was, and the fact that so many talented musicians weren't making us consistent living doing what they were doing. So that's when we decided to start. Like we said, well, hey, why don't we just put this music online and see what happens? And little did we know, we a lot of naivety comes into starting a company because you just do not know what you're getting into. And so I didn't know anything about building a startup or a company or raising venture capital or having employees. It just sort of happened, and it 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 was a necessity for us to figure it out, because if not, we were going to have to go work at Kroger, which is our Tesco, or something, like we were just going to have to survive any way we could. And so we sort of, it was born out of this deep need to make it work for us and also the other talented musicians around us.
I love that because what you're talking about there is it wasn't really about becoming a founder or starting a tech company. It was simply about solving a problem and using the tools around you that were available. You guys had a recording studio, you could put that music online and see how people responded to it. And out of that, this journey of being a tech founder is born. But the goal was always to solve the problem and to solve a problem that you and Michael were experiencing. So I think that's a great message for me, certainly, but also for anyone listening to this show. There's going to be lots of people who are starting companies or thinking, early in the year about how they might want to pivot their own career. And actually, maybe
Yeah.
rather than focusing on the stature or the status you could achieve, it's about focus on the problem that you could solve and try and find a driving passion in that space. And maybe the opportunity for launching a business or career growth or some kind of status stems from that, but go back to the problem first, right? So I think that's really, really powerful. And the other thing, you said about if you've been going through YouTube, you've probably heard Soundstripe's music. Well, listen, everybody, if you just listen to the intro and the outro of this episode, it's right there. Travis doesn't know this, but I signed up a couple of weeks ago. I thought, well, if I'm going to interview this guy, I better put some money in the hat.
That's very sweet of you. Thanks.
Anyway, now I know that you've been thinking pretty seriously about some of your experience as a founder and how you've established this business and what kind of lessons you want to bring to the audience and what tool or insight you want to bring to our viewers and listeners today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is, but start with who is it for? Like, who are you speaking to in today's episode?
Well, yeah, I did put some thought into this, and I didn't want to just come at this from, how to grow your TikTok or podcast following. There are tons of experts that are seriously so good at that they're way better at that than me. And so I wanted to take a step back and offer up something that isn't talked about a lot. And the this could be for a startup founder. This could be for a head of marketing at a company. Um, but it also could be a solopreneur. It could be a creator, an artist. So it really is for everyone. And that is this the development of you or your company's mindset and framework for experimentation and inventiveness. Um, and one thing I've learned over the 8 years of running a startup is that people usually aren't particularly good at predicting the future and being right. They're not. Like, they think they do, they think they are. Everybody thinks they're Elon Musk and sort of can like just predict the future, but it's usually not the case. And so you have to counteract this human instinct to put your ideas on a pedestal, and you have to counteract this human instinct to that all your ideas are sacred. And so, when I was a music producer, for example, we had songwriters that would come into the studio trying things like melodies and lyrics, and they didn't come in, the best ones didn't come in thinking they had just wrote something very sacred that they couldn't change. They experimented with it. And if it didn't work, they immediately went on with the session, really not emotionally attached to what they had written. And they were just doing the work of writing a song. And so some of the most amateur artists that would come in had only written maybe 5 songs in their whole life and thought these things were masterpieces that couldn't be changed in any sort of way at all. And those were almost 100% not good songs. The good songs came from, oh, I don't like that word. What about this? What about that melody? Oh, that stinks. Like, let's try something else. And so, uh, yeah, so I've started thinking about how does that apply to people as creators and as companies too, not just music. And I think the best thing is to go back to your 5th grade science book and the chapter on the scientific method. The scientific method is basically 5 steps, 5 levels. The first is to state the problem or the question that you have. The problem could be, I don't have any podcast followers, or I don't have, or the problem could be, oh, music licensing is really complicated, or I don't know how to license a song, or what have you. It could be anything. Or the problem could be, I'm a marketer working for a company and we are not growing fast enough. Number 2 is your theory or your hypothesis. So from that problem, you do a lot of research. You start consuming content. You're consuming podcasts. You're reading books, and out from that research comes a hypothesis. So let's say, oh, music licensing is difficult. What if we made a website? What if we did this XYZ? What if we made our podcast this kind of content? So are you following? So that's the second piece. The third piece is to do the third level is to do the experiment. So that's the actual work of putting an experiment out into the world. And the fourth piece is data analysis. This sounds super boring, but basically you have to go back and analyze this experiment. What's happening with this? Am I actually making money, or am I not making money? And sort of really get into the details of that data. And then fifth is conclusion. What did you conclude from that experiment? And did it work? Did it not work? And should I change it for the next experiment? So our company was really founded this way, and it's a pillar of our culture that we are constantly agile in our minds. We're constantly thinking, okay, how do we make this better? How do we experiment? Is this working or is this not working? And we're not taking ideas. And, if I have an idea for the company, I'm not saying I'm not coming down from the mountain with the stone tablets. I'm coming out with an experiment. Hey, I have a hypothesis about the world. I think that our customers, I think the pricing is off, or I think something needs to happen with our content. Let's try some experiments, and think about there's no surprise that Mr. Beast is the largest YouTuber in the world. That, there is a reason he is, because think about, he's not just making content willy-nilly and putting it online and hoping for the best, right? He has probably, I'm just guessing, but probably a team of people that analyze that data after they put out a video. Should my shirt be green or red? Should the button be this or that? Should the copy be this or that? and they put out an hypothesis, an experiment, and now they're doing the data analysis. They come to a conclusion, and then they rinse and repeat and do it all over again. And so many people that I know starting companies get so in their head about their own ideas. And they get so in their head that this is what we must do and this is the right thing. But if you treat it more like a science experiment, it really objectifies the thing that you're trying to do, and it takes the emotion away from this experiment because it could fail very easily, or it could succeed, or it could succeed just a little bit where you get just a breath of fresh air that then you can go try another experiment. And so people really are so emotional with these things sometimes. And this is a method that we use to sort of back up and look at it objectively and 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 do really good work that way.
I love the idea of seeing yourself as more of a scientist rather than a startup founder or a business owner or a marketeer. Because I think that that discipline of being able to detach yourself from the thing that you've become passionate about in a healthy way is so important. You get these really interesting personalities where people they've hit a home run. They've come up with this amazing idea and they're really obsessed about it. And sometimes it does work, but you'll see that same person when they launch their next business. I mean, how many startup founders, right,
Mhm.
have got those stories of like, I had great success and then my next three businesses failed. And they've had to rethink
Totally.
the way they approach their business ideas. And they've realized that just because they struck gold with one great idea, or it was right time, right place, or whatever, met the right person, that doesn't necessarily mean that their approach was the right approach. And I think this idea of distancing yourself, creating that emotional space, not being overly wedded to your ideas by thinking like a scientist, I think is really powerful and really important. And I've got problem, hypothesis, experiment, data analysis, and then what conclusions are you drawing? And another thing you mentioned actually I thought was really interesting was Mr. Beast and the team that we hypothesize that he has supporting him. I'm hearing more and more that many YouTube creators, they don't make a single piece of content anymore until they've figured out the thumbnail, because those little bits, the title, whether your mouth is opened or closed or what kind of clothes you're wearing, like the algorithm is thinking through all of that stuff. And so
Yeah.
lots of creators now are thinking, what's the right title and thumbnail to produce before we even start thinking about writing scripts or capturing content. So I think this kind of test and learn, analyze thing is so key. Now, thinking about our audience and what's the one thing that they could do today, like what's the one place to start? You may have already mentioned it, so you might be returning something here, but there might be like one level up. Like, what's the one thing that you'd want people to take action with as soon as this episode ends?
I would start at the beginning of the scientific method. I would start with the problem, the question that you're trying to solve. It people, including myself, can easily get sort of discombobulated and you forget where you are in the process. And and maybe you're just trying to pull at any strings you can, whether you're marketing something or creating content or you're creating a business. Um, it's really healthy to breathe, take a step back, and think, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to solve for? What's the problem? And then do I have a theory about how to solve that problem? It's going to become clear to you um, when you can see the problem. And for us, when we started Soundstripe, the problem was twofold. One, music licensing was incredibly complicated and antiquated and still like done with paper and pencil and lawyers. And number two, artists were not making a consistent income. They were, it was either feast or famine, it was a lottery system. The best artists got paid so well, and then everybody else was broke. How do we solve those two things? And so that we had a theory. And that theory actually ended up being wrong 3 times until we actually finally made the third try was Soundstripe. The first version was a bad brand. The second version was a bad business model. And then the third version ended up being Soundstripe with the brand, the music, the business model. And all of those things came together because we ran experiments, 1, 2, 3 times. And so I would just urge people to start at the beginning with the problem.
Travis, I think that is some outstanding advice. Start with the problem first and think like a scientist. And it feels to me as if there's probably a few more episodes that we could discuss there. I'd love to hear more about the 2 versions of Soundstripe that didn't hit the ground running, the business model where that was wrong, and how the brand didn't perhaps come to life in the way that you guys initially expected. But we're out of time for today's episode, so hopefully we'll come back to that another time. Thank you so much for making the time for the show. Let's speak again soon.
Thanks, Dan. Cheers.